Welcome into the LSU Insider Podcast. Today is Monday, September the 22nd. I'm Zach Ewing, joined by a couple of our LSU beat writers at The Advocate. He's Koki Riley and Reed Darcy. Guys, thanks for being here. We got a little bit of breaking news this morning. It won't be all that fresh by the time you watch the podcast when it posts this afternoon, but we just found out in the last, couple of hours who the SEC's annual opponents will be going forward for football. And so we know that LSU, at least for the next 4 years, their quasi-permanent opponents will be Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. So quick reaction to that.
Well, first thing is that there's no Alabama, and that's not a permanent thing. LSU, like Alabama's most likely still going to be on LSU's schedule quite a bit, but on an annual basis for the 4 years, Alabama will not be one of LSU's annual opponents. So I think that's a little disappointing. LSU-Alabama is obviously one of the best rivalries in the country, and it's a game that always does well on TV, and it's one of the best games in college football. And so we're not getting that annually, but the SEC had some difficult decisions to make. You can't make everybody happy, and I was a little surprised though that they sort of sacrificed LSU Alabama to make this work. I thought there was kind of a way that you could do it just to make sure you get it in there, but I don't know. What do you think, Koki?
Yeah, I think that the argument that we need to make all of this even from a strength of schedule standpoint is pretty silly, in my opinion, because how do we know how good the team's going to be in 2 years, let alone 3 or 4? So I think just sort of, so for anyone on the Alabama side, I don't want to accuse them of anything they're not trying to do, but for anyone on the Alabama side who's like, well, playing Tennessee, Auburn, and LSU would be too difficult. I mean, I don't really get that. Like, how are we supposed to know how good Tennessee is going to be in 3 years? Like, there's so much changes in college football year to year, and I don't know. Like, even if one team looks good at one point, there's always transitions, and teams and players are changing so much. This isn't the NFL, so I don't really understand it personally.
I will push back a little bit on that, and I agree with you in general, especially in the NIL and transfer portal era. Like, you can't tell for sure how good teams are going to be. I think we can be very confident in saying that over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, or even a 4-year period, which is what we're talking about here, that LSU, for instance, is going to be better than Mississippi State. I think we can be very confident in saying that. They have more infrastructure in their program. They have more support. Just the historical recruiting that LSU does. I think we would be whistling in the dark not to recognize that some schools are just going to have a much better chance. Now, having said that, there are a lot of SEC schools that have popped up and had a couple good years, and then they go back to, you're just not sure what you're going to get. Like, Ole Miss is one of those. Tennessee, to a certain extent, has been one of those. Florida, Missouri, even Oklahoma last year was not any good, and they look much better this year. Like, there are a lot of different. Vanderbilt this year is better. There's a lot of those schools that you can't really tell. I do think there's some, and if you give a team, like Alabama, you give them Tennessee and Auburn and LSU, there's a chance that's really difficult in a given year. Where giving them Mississippi State, I think that's why LSU, Alabama.
I mean, that's fair, but say there's 7 of those teams, right? I mean, we could even list them off if we want to spend the time listing them off. 3 or 4 of them are probably going to be pretty good, just given on probability, right? It's rare that 6 of them aren't going to be any good unless something happened to the conference, if that's going to be the case. And I don't know. I just don't like nitpicking over something like whether you should play one team or because we don't know how good Tennessee's going to be in 3 or 4 years. We just don't really know. Tennessee had this fallow period for a while before Josh Heupel took over. So I don't know. Auburn, same thing. Auburn still might be struggling. We're still not quite sure. So I could make the argument that Alabama has a pretty easy draw in 3 or 4 years because they're not playing a traditional, a super duper traditional power like a Georgia or an LSU or even a Texas. So I don't know.
I'd imagine the SEC is thinking hey, we can still put LSU Alabama on the schedule. And how many of those games are we actually going to losing? Maybe one. I still think they're going to find a way to put them on the schedule, and then maybe 4 years from now in 2029 or 2030, maybe they'll rotate and they'll make LSU Alabama an annual game. But there's still ways to put them on the schedule in the meantime. So it's just such a ratings draw that I have a tough time seeing that they're just going to put that game on the back burner for 2 years.
I mean, that's a good point. The way this works, for those who aren't sure how it's going to work in the 9-game SEC schedule, which starts next year, you get these 3 annual opponents, not permanent necessarily, annual opponents. They're at least permanent for the next 4 years. And then your other 6 games rotate home and away each year so that you will play all of the other 15 teams in the conference every 2 years. So by definition, LSU and Alabama will only play twice in the next 4 years. That's the only way that works out. So they'll play once in Baton Rouge and once in Tuscaloosa over the next 4 years, just like LSU will play South Carolina once in Columbia and once in Baton Rouge. And they'll play Kentucky once in Lexington and once in Baton Rouge. And they'll play Florida once in Gainesville, once in Baton Rouge. So that's how it will work with every other team. And that's why I agree with you, Koki, in that it doesn't matter all that much. Because when you say, oh, Alabama, maybe they got it easy with Auburn, Tennessee, and Mississippi State, well, they still got, of the other 12 teams, pick out any 6 of them, you're going to have some pretty good opponents in those. You're either going to draw an LSU and a Texas, or a Georgia and a LSU, or an Oklahoma on a year they're good, and a Florida on a year they're good, or something. I mean, you're going to get a tough schedule in this conference, no matter what. Having said that, let's dig into LSU's the teams that they did choose for LSU.
Yeah,
I thought Ole Miss was a shoo-in. That's the most played rivalry, in the history of LSU, I believe. And so I think playing the Rebels was an automatic. I think Texas A&M was very natural. That had been, until Texas came into the league, the traditional Thanksgiving weekend game that LSU played. And before that, it was Arkansas. And so I do think that there's some sense to the way they did it. I get Alabama's the obvious one that you could have had, Koki. Which one would you have dropped to put Alabama in?
I probably would have dropped A&M to put Alabama in. I think there is something there with the whole Louisiana, the Golden Boot trophy and the whole Louisiana versus Arkansas and the next door neighbors thing. So I think it would have been nice to keep that. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like when you're making these decisions, the number one priority should be, do people want to watch this game? Right? Do people want to watch this game every single year? And everyone wants to watch the LSU Alabama game every single year, even though technically this draw, if you could make a strong argument that this is better for LSU that they get to face Arkansas every year than instead of Alabama, or roll the dice on whether A&M or Ole Miss might have a couple down years during this 4-year stretch. But I think that should be the number one priority. Do people want to watch these games? And I know you can't do that perfectly across the board, but when you combine the history of LSU Alabama, the fact that there's always a bye week before that game, and there's a reason why they set up the schedule that way. Mm-hmm. So you have this gladiator clash on November 8th, November 7th. I don't know. As a college football fan, people should be upset about this, at least to some degree.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I wasn't necessarily surprised that they didn't give LSU Alabama on the annual schedule, but I am a little disappointed by it. I think the other two, like you mentioned, Ole Miss and Arkansas are fine, especially with LSU and Arkansas. If Rab were here, I could just picture him saying LSU is one of the only SEC schools that does have a natural rival for the last week of the regular season, and so Arkansas.
And then he'll talk about how LSU has never played Michigan before. That'll be the second thing.
Yeah, and never been the Rose Bowl.
Yeah. Never been to the Rose Bowl. That's the third one.
So Rab's taught us well. LSU does not have a natural in-state rival. I think Alabama, Auburn, or Tennessee, Vanderbilt. So Arkansas is probably going to be that team for them, and they're going to play the last week of the regular season, kind of like a rivalry matchup. So it should be interesting to see how exactly it shakes out. I don't know exactly if LSU's excited or disappointed that they aren't playing Alabama every year. It should certainly help their strength of schedule. But at the same time, it's less of a draw if you have Arkansas or Ole Miss come into town instead of Alabama. So.
Yeah, I think the other takeaway here is that LSU probably on a competitive standpoint, I think you like this. I think traditionally, again, we don't know every year, and Mike Elko seems like he's got it going at Texas A&M, and they may end up being really, really good over the next 4 years. But A&M historically, LSU's been a better program. Obviously been a better program historically than Arkansas, and Ole Miss has it going with Lane Kiffin, but if Lane Kiffin ever leaves, like, I don't know. I think there's a chance that we look at this in like 2028 and we're going, oh man, LSU got off easy here.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we'll see what the other 6 opponents are, but they might end up with a pretty easy slate. So I want to ask you guys, before we kind of dig into the rest of the show, who do you think got it hardest and easiest in the SEC?
I need to pull up.
I've got them in front of
Yeah.
me. I'll give you a couple of candidates for hardest. I think Texas A&M. They got LSU and Texas, and then their third one's Missouri, who's been pretty good the last couple of years. Now, historically, again, you don't know about that one, but just getting LSU and Texas, that's pretty rough.
Doesn't Arkansas have the same exact
And Arkansas
draw?
also has LSU, Texas, and Missouri. So
Which is wild.
Those two stick out to me right away, but they don't have each other. Arkansas and Texas don't have each other. They just have the same 3.
That's weird.
I'll throw out Auburn. I mentioned before before we went on the air, they've got Alabama and Georgia. Vanderbilt's the third one, but having Alabama and Georgia.
They had to
on
give
the
him the
schedule.
Vandy cookie
Yeah.
after giving him Alabama and Georgia. And then as far as easiest, I think Tennessee's up there. Like, Tennessee gets Alabama, but their other 2 are Kentucky and Vandy, which, again, Vandy's got a good team this year. Historically, Kentucky and Vandy are 2 of the teams you'd like to play every year. So I think Tennessee's up there as one of the easier ones. I'm looking at who else.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the...
Florida's not bad. I mean, you knew they were going to get Georgia, but then they get South Carolina and Kentucky.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the draw Tennessee got as the easiest, and the draw that...
Florida.
No, it's for the hardest.
The hardest.
For the hardest, I think it's the draw that like Arkansas / Texas A&M got. I
They
think
both
that's
got the
toughest
same
draw.
thing, and that's
Yeah.
pretty tough to get LSU and
LSU
Texas
and
every
Texas.
year.
Yeah.
And it, like, if Missouri keeps it rolling, like, that's if that's your weakest one.
If
that's,
Missouri's your weakest
Yeah.
one, that's not great. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
tough. But again, like, who knows? You know, like for years and years, we talked about like, when is Texas going to get it together, right? And I know they finally got it together right as they get into the SEC, but like again, like you don't really know what these teams are going to look like in 3 to 4 years. Like, I can't keep stressing that enough. You know, like it's a fun exercise. Don't get me wrong; it's not a totally useless one, but I don't know. I just feel like when people are putting this together are stressing over like who should play who, then it's just not quite worth that much.
I agree with that.
stress.
That's probably why they're going to cycle it every 4 years.
Yeah.
yeah,
to
and then this
balance
could
it out a
change. This is for 2026 through 2029, and again,
Yeah.
LSU's going to play every team in the conference at least twice during those years.
Yeah.
It's just that these 3 teams is who they play 4 times.
And that's why I prefer them to just play the teams that you traditionally play at that point, right? Like, if you're going to play everybody a lot anyway, you might as well play the games that people want to watch every single year. So,
yeah. You can certainly argue it different ways,
Yeah.
but we could talk about this a long time. I want to dig into what we came in here today thinking we would talk about before we got this news broken. That's Garrett Nussmeier. LSU is playing a season this season, by the way, and they happen to be pretty good. And they beat Southeastern on Saturday, so we'll dig into that a little bit. Do want to let you know that the LSU Insider is brought to you by Jerry Lane Cadillac. Command the road in a Cadillac where luxury, power, and presence come together. Experience it today at Jerry Lane Cadillac. Garrett Nussmeier, excuse me, guys, played his best statistical game of the year by a good bit Saturday. We were told last week he had an injury. We found out on the pregame broadcast, got a little more information about that, as the TV broadcasters sometimes get. It was an oblique injury that he suffered in the preseason, aggravated against Clemson. He did look better. 3 touchdowns, I think 273 yards. Is this Nuss back to his old self, or is this still Southeastern, and I'm not sure yet?
I'd say he looked really good. You know, physically, he looked pretty sharp. You know, it is Southeastern, so take it with a grain of salt. But I saw what I wanted to see from Garrett Nussmeier. I saw the accuracy was there. I saw, the arm strength was back to a certain degree. I saw him get out the pocket and scramble a little bit. He picked up 26 yards on that one run, and that was a career long. It just felt like his passes had that zip to him back. You know, I felt also felt that he was more comfortable in the pocket, and he navigated it well. He looked a lot more like the Nuss we saw against Clemson than we saw the last 2 weeks. So I think that's encouraging. Again, he wasn't playing the level of defense that he's going to be playing in the next few weeks. But what you wanted to see was just him looking comfortable and confident, and him having all that arm talent back. Because we didn't see much of that in the last couple of weeks. And I think the stat line could have been even better because LSU's receivers had quite a few drops. So I think overall pretty encouraging from Nuss. He looked pretty sharp, and that's what you wanted to see from the game against Southeastern.
Yeah, you wanted to see if he looked good physically, and I think you definitely checked that box. And honestly, there's not a whole lot else to add because, again, they were playing Southeastern, and they should be kind of dominating that game as So, statistically, you can't really take too much from it.
Yeah, one thing I still kind of want to flag is he still didn't seem to be throwing down the field a lot. 273 yards is great. 31 attempts for 273 yards. You're still only averaging less than 9 yards an attempt. We saw Michael Van Buren come in and average more than that per attempt. I'm still wondering if there's a little bit of an injury thing where they don't want him to really stress that oblique. That may be all that is, and they're waiting another week to kind of go into that. But we talked about that last week where they'd only attempted, I think, 13 passes of 20 air yards or more. I haven't looked yet, but I don't think there were too many more on
His
Saturday.
average depth of target was like a yard further in this game than it was in the last one, just looking at the numbers this morning. And I don't know, part of it also is just sort of like the design of the offense and the fact that they're not a very efficient team running the ball, and the offense is really built on these like crossers over the middle of the field, these 10 to 15 yard crossers. So you kind of saw that a little bit more. The offense is also kind of built on like Nussmeier extending plays with his legs a little bit, get rolling out of the pocket, and then finding a guy on a mini scramble drill. So you just saw that more in this game, more successfully, because again, like Nussmeier just seemed like he could sort of like turn his body and rip a throw a little bit better, and that's kind of all you needed to see in this game.
Yeah, I think Southeastern as well was playing more of a conservative kind of defense. They weren't blitzing too heavily. They dropped back, put defenders into coverage, and playing these shells. And so I think that's part of the reason why the receivers weren't exactly open downfield, and LSU wasn't attacking downfield. It looks like they in a game like this you want to be pretty vanilla on offense. You don't want to stretch things out too much.
Sure.
So you're going to see maybe you'll see more of that at Ole Miss, but the bottom line is that Nuss looked a lot better than he has the last 2 weeks. He looked healthy.
Yes, 7.7 yards average depth of target. I'm looking it up now. It's still well below what he was doing last year. But again, lots of variables here. Still, maybe they want him to nurse that injury for one more week. Still could just be being vanilla. We'll talk more about this on Thursday's pod. Obviously, that's going to have to open up against Ole Miss because you're going to need to score points to win that game.
Yeah.
I don't care how good the defense
What really surprised me is that they brought him back for the first series of the second half, and he took a pretty big shot on that possession, so that surprised me a little bit. I think if they brought him back, then they're pretty confident in his health. So,
just found it here. He was 2 of 3 on passes 20 yards or more in the air. So little bit of improvement there. He's now 6 of 16 for the year. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the story with Nuss. I'm still a little confused, or I'm not sure what the right word is, perplexed at how this injury was handled by Brian Kelly. Like, it still kind of seems to me to announce it the Monday after the Florida game, when you had all this controversy about what the offense was looking like and what Nussmeier was looking like. It kind of smelled like Brian Kelly was like, well, hey, look, he's got an excuse, okay? Everybody, look at this excuse. If it wasn't that serious of an injury, it was never on the injury report, why were you telling us then if that wasn't the reason?
One, it's not an injury report, it's an availability report, so his availability was never in question, which is why they didn't put him on there, and that's why they call it an availability report, not an injury report, which is...
You've said that before, I can tell.
Yeah, I know, but but also with Nussmeier, what I think probably happened was... and then this is like this is mostly theory, so take this with a grain of salt. But he was kind of feeling this during the preseason. They shut him down. He feels better ahead of the Clemson game. He plays well in the Clemson game. He aggravates it either at practice after the Clemson game, during the Clemson game, at some point in that sort of area before week 2. They struggle in week 2. He's still feeling it in week 3. And then heading into this week, he's finally feels like more like himself again. But between this and this, as I'm touching my knee, which is another slight aggravation he had at the very beginning of the preseason, at least if I'm an NFL team, and even if I'm an LSU fan, you have to be worried about all these nicks and knacks that he's getting, and he's not really getting hit a whole ton. He's not like Jaden Daniels out there, putting his body on the line. If he's just going to continuously keep on getting these little nicks and knacks that are kind of affecting his play or affecting his availability during practice, how's that going to affect this offense? How's that going to affect his draft stock? It's worth wondering because it's not like he's this big bulking guy who is, used to taking on. It's not like Ben Roethlisberger is used to playing with 3 different injuries all the time. So it's a little worrying. It has to be a little. Yeah, it has to be a little worrying if you're him, if you're an LSU fan, if you're even an NFL team.
I'll push back on that a little bit. I think it's just 2 things that happen. It's not minor deals. He does have, the knee thing, according to what Brian Kelly has said, it is kind of like a thing that he's just having to deal with for the last couple of years. And he kind of aggravated it by planting wrong in practice one day. So maybe that's just a mild concern. But, it happens. It's a couple injuries popped up in preseason camp. I don't think it's any big deal. I think it's more likely that Brian Kelly was, I don't want to say hiding, but not revealing the fact that he was injured so that, so that Louisiana Tech and Florida wouldn't, be trying to go after his vulnerable spots, on the field while
that's probably a part
playing,
of it too. That, and there was also the outburst. I think it was almost like, here's a cookie for you guys. I just yelled at you for 5 minutes.
Okay, look, the point is this: for LSU to hit its ceiling this year, they need more from Garrett Nussmeier than what he has provided thus far, and that means he's going to have to be reasonably healthy. Nobody's completely healthy in November. This is a football season. We know that. But he's going to have to get to the point where he can reach a higher level of play. And we started to see that Saturday. The question is, can we see it moving forward? Now, as we kind of transition into the rest of LSU's offense, I thought, they worked pretty well. Again, the running game, 35 carries for 135 yards. They did complete passes to 13 different players, which was cool. Mm-hmm. You don't see that very often. But the running game in particular, the big story here is Caden Durham's injury. And Juwan Johnson was the one who took over. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about that, some of the other injuries, the situation at right tackle, which is not an injury situation, but a targeting ejection situation, and sort of all of this stuff LSU is going to have to juggle this week as they prepare for Ole Miss. So we'll be back right after this.
I think the biggest thing that separates us is our people. We have a really amazing staff that really care about their customers, really care about our product. At Jerry Lane Cadillac, we value trust and transparency above all else. We have a little bit of something for everyone. So whether it be the 2025 Escalade, any of the smaller crossover vehicles, the XT4, 5, and 6, we've also got a wide variety of new EVs, including the 2025 electric Escalade IQ. I think the product lineup right now is the best that it's ever been in Cadillac.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me love.
Did they ask you to do the commercial too?
Yeah, but they just gave me one line.
Bet like a Caesar. Like, we're gonna sit here and we're gonna tell them how Caesar's Sportsbook is just so easy to use that you can watch and bet thousands of sports events, even some NFL games.
They'll probably show us betting on our favourite players and teams at all the Vegas hotspots too.
Like, we have time for that montage.
I told him I couldn't do it.
They couldn't afford me.
Get my VPN to work. Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Talking some LSU offense. 56 points against Southeastern. They did what they had to do against an overmatched opponent, guys. There are still some concerns. We talked about Nussmeier. The other one would be Caden Durham, who had a foot injury for much of last year, has an ankle injury, and had to leave this one as well.
This is a bigger concern to me than I think anything we've seen from Nuss or anything we've seen from the passing game, the running game, and overall its effectiveness and overall the health of its two guys. Juwan Johnson played well against Southeastern, but you need to have Caden Durham if you want to have a good rushing attack, and you need him as the best version of himself. So it's a little concerning that he now has an ankle injury. This running back room has taken a couple hits, losing him for, I don't know if he's going to sit the Ole Miss game, but losing one of your scholarship for freshman JT Lindsey before the season. Juwan Johnson, is a good natural runner, but he's a converted defensive back / converted quarterback / this jack of all trades kind of guy. So it'll be interesting to see what Brian Kelly says about Caden Durham in a little bit when we talk to him at noon today. But overall, I think the rushing attack, it hasn't been great, and now that there's an injury, it's a concern going into the SEC slate.
Yeah, but I think Johnson's done a nice job a better job, I think, at hitting the hole when it's actually there. Like, I think Durham's patience has helped him in some games and in some scenarios, but there have been times where he's bounced out runs that he shouldn't be bouncing out. He hasn't hit the hole right when it's there. Sometimes there's I don't want to say lack of decisiveness, because he'll make decisions, but sometimes it's just that extra beat of patience that doesn't need to be there, or just that tendency to bounce things out. So I'm not like, I don't think the running game will go to the tank if this is the case, and I also think, like,
at least not anymore into the tank.
yeah, and again, like, some of the running game has to do with schematic structure. A lot of the running game has also to do with the quality of what's going on in the offensive line. It's kind of like problems on all three levels of a run game, right? Between your running backs, your line, and your scheme. And they're slowly trying to figure out the scheme part with more of these under center runs that we can talk about a little bit. But it's a 3-tiered issue right now, and if they can't get it fixed, then it just makes life a lot more difficult for Garrett Nussmeier.
That's where I'm at with this is, no, the Caden Durham injury is not a good thing, and you need to get that guy 100%. We've seen what he can do at times, at least over the last 2 years. But these problems run deeper than, like, I don't think Harlem Berry and Juwan Johnson are incapable of carrying the load for this rushing offense if you can fix the scheme issue, if you can get the O-line run blocking better. I mean, those, to me, are the real issues here.
Yeah, but Juwan Johnson, I think, is an interesting guy to talk about. He's a good pass catcher. He has a natural feel for, reading a defense and hitting the holes. We talked to him last week, and he said that playing quarterback in high school, which he was, helped him, prepare to play running back in college. And if you don't remember, Coke had a good story on him after the game. He started out as a defensive back at LSU, and then LSU moved him to running back last year, and then they moved him from running back to quarterback, and then they moved him from quarterback back to running back. So he's kind of bounced all over the place, and he wants to stick at running back. That's where he wants to be. That's where he feels best. That's where he thinks his talents are best suited. So it looks like he's going to be a really significant part of the offense moving forward. If Caden, with or without Caden Durham, I think he earned himself a few more touches against Southeastern with the way he broke some tackles, with the way he caught passes out of the backfield. It looks like he's he's a complete back, and so is Caden Durham, but I think LSU is going to rely on him quite a bit moving forward, and he's going to have to create some yards, break tackles against SEC opponents. That's the next step for him.
Yeah, I would agree that. And I think Durham is their best running back because of the potential that he has, and there's still like a decently high floor to it. I think he's really improved as a pass blocker.
How he can break tackles.
Yeah, it's just how he can break tackles. And the way and his patience when he's like getting that timing right with his patience, it's a beautiful. It's pretty beautiful to watch. He's not going to take the top off a defense with his explosiveness. They kind of Harlem Berry for that theoretically, but Berry's had a lot of trouble breaking tackles and a lot of trouble with the physicality of the SEC, I'd say. So they don't really have that Leonard Fournette. This is the guy running back, but I don't know. I think a lot of it's schematic. I still think a lot of this run game, the problems are schematic and with the offensive line in particular.
Yeah, and look, we said the same thing when we were talking about Nussmeier. Like, for this team to reach its ceiling, Nussmeier has to be better. For this team to reach its ceiling, and for Nussmeier to reach his ceiling, the running game has to it. I'm not saying it has to be this great, powerful machine that you're relying on all the time. It has to at least be a threat to a defense. And right now it's not.
Especially in short yardage situations.
Correct.
And we saw them, they were better against Southeastern in short yardage situations, but it was Southeastern. So they're going to have to go to Ole Miss this week, and they're going to have to prove that they can pick up 2 or 3 yards on third and short, on fourth and short. And we saw them experimenting some things. We saw them go under center a few times, which is a pretty new wrinkle. They hardly ever went under center with Caden Daniels. They hardly ever went under center last year. That's something that can really help your rushing attack.
I've been screaming for that for
yeah.
like a year and a half on the show.
Love going under center. And Brian Kelly has said this. I'm not sure how much I believe him, but he said that they're going to give Jack Pyburn some snaps at fullback, and that could help open things up. I'll see that when I believe it. I mean, I'll believe that when I see it. But it just goes to show they're trying to be creative to get as much possible out of this rushing attack, whether it's going under center, using your edge rusher as a fullback, or doing a lot of screen passes to sort of augment the run game. It really feels like they can't rely on the run game just to get the traditional 4 or 5 yards with pulling blockers. So they have to do some creative things to get those yards because it's a struggle otherwise.
But if you have to do those creative things like all the time, it's almost like a gadgety.
They're not really
offense.
creative
You're
anymore.
not. Yeah, you're not. You're just a
And
gadgety running game.
Xavier Thomas coming in on jet sweeps, those kinds of things.
That's not going to surprise anybody if that's what you have to rely on.
Yeah, and like you want to be able to, like, the reason why that matters is because you want to be able to marry what you're doing with the run game to the passing game, and they just haven't done that at all.
And that
since Joe Sloan's been the coordinator, at least.
That game plan worked really well against Clemson. I think it took Clemson off guard. I'm talking about the screens that they mixed in. But once they put that on film, I think Louisiana Tech and Florida saw it, and they could react to it and adjust to it and figure out a way to defend it. And I think that was part of why the rushing attack struggled in those 2 games.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And there are other injuries to talk about. We talked about Caden Durham, so let's get into our injury report. It's brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic. The Baton Rouge Clinic is your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. So besides Caden Durham leaving with the ankle injury, we had Gabriel Relaford, a rotational defensive end, left with a shoulder injury. Saw him with a sling on, correct? Toward the end of the game.
Yes.
Also, Trades Green, Braylon Moore, look like they're close. They didn't want to push it necessarily against Southeastern. Those guys look like they're close, but sort of kind of a mounting injury problem for LSU as it goes into the meat of the schedule here.
Moore seems like he's fine. He played again this week, which is actually a little bit surprising if you think about it, because
I was
it's
surprised.
Southeastern.
Yeah.
Trades Green dressed and warmed up, but he didn't play, which that honestly makes sense to me. Just to get his feet underneath him a little bit, but not actually push him in a game where you really don't need him. My guess is that he plays next week. The Durham thing is probably the biggest potential issue for them, because I think they can generate a 4th edge rusher out of all the young guys that they have. And if you want to include Dylan Carpenter, is a little bit older, into that mix as well, you can, because I think Carpenter can at least hold up in the run. He seems like a pretty big and physical edge rusher. They have Kalaj Cobbins as a pass rushing option. They have CJ Jackson as a pass rushing option. Damian Shanklin had 2 sacks.
He did 2 sacks.
So you can kind of cobble together that 4th spot when you have those 3 veterans already set in stone.
And Jamari Butler played well against Southeastern for what it's worth. But the main injuries that we need to keep an eye on this week are one, Caden Durham with the ankle, Wes Weeks with the calf. We're not sure exactly if he's going to be able to suit up. I'd expect Trades Green to play because we saw him warming up against Southeastern. But I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. Who am I forgetting?
I don't know, like Solomon Thomas's foot injury that he's probably going to be out for most of the year for.
So Caden Durham, West Weeks, Trades Green,
Relaford.
Relaford.
We just talked about.
Yeah, Gabriel Relaford.
Gabriel Relaford. So
Okay, so that's sort of the injury situation. I think the good news for LSU is that none of these are long term. We'll see about Caden Durham's ankle. Rutherford, that may be. We are into the SEC schedule. We're going to get the availability reports every week, not injury reports, but availability reports.
And I think they have depth at every spot except for running back. And Devon Key's coming in, and you're still able to hold Florida to 10 points, to really just a touchdown after after that field goal on the opening drive where you lose Whit Weeks. I mean, to let that Devon Key's play as much as he did, that was, and him actually, play pretty well. That was pretty big for them. So I think they're actually fine at linebacker, because then you might have to throw out some young guys in there occasionally. They have to play a little bit more, but they were able to survive with Tylen Singleton and Zach Weeks. Maybe it's going to be harder against a team like Ole Miss, which is really good, and they're not going to huddle a lot, and it makes life a little bit more difficult.
A better offense than Florida, you would
a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit.
Best offense they faced by a mile.
Yes,
I think.
Yes.
And we'll preview that game Thursday. I mean, the timing could be worse though. Yes, you got to face Ole Miss, and that's going to be difficult. But they've got a bye week right after that. They just had Southeastern. None of these are super serious injuries, so they've gotten sort of this method to nursing them all along and getting them back, hopefully to full health, maybe by South Carolina week. But you do have to get through this week without some of these guys. You mentioned Whit Weeks being out for the Florida game, and that is a good transition into our next topic here, which is targeting. And as we say on the screen here, we are going to target the targeting rule for a little bit, as Brian Kelly did after the game on Saturday, because DJ Chester got ejected for targeting.
Very bizarre play.
I mean, this is just the most frustrating thing in the world, because I was just looking at the play-by-play. The score is 49-7, or 42. It was 42-7. 42-7, late third quarter. LSU sends Damian Ramos out there for a 59-yard field goal attempt. Okay, it was 4th and 9 at the 42, 28 seconds left. Okay, Damian Ramos, let's go see what you can do. Southeastern puts a guy back in the end zone to see if, in case the kick comes up short, they can return it. You see people do this, and the kick six with Auburn, Alabama, we saw that years ago. So, sure enough, Damian Ramos' field goal comes up short, and Southeastern is returning it. And of all people, DJ Chester, the offensive lineman, who moved to right tackle in this game, we'll talk about that in a minute, doesn't really practice tackling. I'm not going to say he doesn't know how to tackle. He's played football a long time, but he gets ejected for targeting. And because it happened in the second half, he will not be able to play in the first half in Oxford. This is a bizarre situation. That is the correct response. Are you kidding me? And that was kind of Brian Kelly's response after the game.
Bizarre, man. It's bizarre. It's that play overall was just wild. But the fact that as a result of it, you lose a player for the first half of the next game. I think this is my opinion on targeting. For a situation like that, where it's not a defenseless player and it's not a reckless or malicious hit, ejecting the guy from the rest of the game is already pretty harsh, in my opinion. But to suspend him for the first half of the next game is... It just adds more on top of that. And Brian Kelly, yes, he's frustrated. It's the second straight week that LSU has lost a pretty important player to a targeting call against Florida. It was Whit Weeks. And because Whit Weeks, the call against him was in the first half, on Florida's first drive. He didn't have to sit the first half of the Southeastern game. But losing DJ Chester is a big deal, because LSU doesn't have that option. He's a sixth offensive lineman. LSU was experimenting with this offensive line throughout the Southeastern game. At the start of the second half, it put DJ Chester in place of Weston Davis, who's been really struggling to start the season. And now against Ole Miss, it doesn't have the option of putting him either at guard or at tackle in case that's a change they want to make. So a bizarro play that happens to have a pretty significant consequence for LSU. So overall, just a weird, I'd imagine, frustrating situation for LSU.
And I just want to add before you jump in, Koki, the other Southeastern committed a penalty on the play anyway, and so
it didn't count.
It was offsetting penalties, and it didn't even matter. And LSU ended up going for it on 4th down and got the first down and scored. It's 42-7. The play didn't even count, and you're losing this guy. And yeah, that's where I'm at too. Is was this a malicious hit? Do you need to eject him? And Koki, I'm going to let you have your say, but you also talked to Whit Weeks about this, and like he made a point too. These guys only get so many college football games to play. It's not like they're trying to hurt people. They're just playing football. Is that really the appropriate punishment?
I look at all of this in a very, very different light because, at least I'm just talking about my opinion. What Whit Weeks said was a pretty good quote, and I thought it was like pretty interesting to hear about it from his perspective, and we can definitely talk about that. But I think we sometimes forget how dangerous this game is. It is incredibly dangerous, and this rule is meant to make it a little less dangerous. And I think it has successfully done that. I feel like the concussions that we've seen in the last 5 years are way down than where they were 10, 15 years ago. And the after effects of this game are it's real, and there's a reason why there was a crisis around maybe 10 years ago where it just felt like, is the sport going to exist in 20 or 30 years because of all the concussion horror stories and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like that's like that big picture is always like looming over my head when it comes to like how much we should be criticizing whether one player misses, one half of one football game, when they have a whole life to live potentially, right? And like this is about like drilling it into people's heads that from the Pop Warner level to the college level to the NFL level that you need to teach these kids how to tackle properly. And it's sort of working, I think, just when we're seeing the lack of concussions, and it's going to be harder and harder to keep that up given how fast and physical the game is. But I think it's important to have like a really, really strong, I don't know what exactly the rule should be, don't get me wrong, but I think it's important to have a very strong rule, when it comes to these sort of targeting infractions. So, should DJ Chester be suspended for the first half of the next game? Maybe not, but should he be suspended for the rest of the game? I think that's fair.
What Brian Kelly would say to that is yes, he does think it's important to protect.
Yeah,
the
I'm not
players.
saying anyone.
I'm glad you inserted that perspective, by the way, because we do need to keep that in mind.
We do.
Yeah.
Brian Kelly would say that yes, he's all for protecting the players. He understands the importance of taking your head out of the tackle and doing it fundamentally right. But for these two plays that we're talking about, the one that Whit Weeks had against Florida and the one that DJ Chester had against Southeastern, Brian Kelly has said that he doesn't know how to coach it any differently, especially with the Whit Weeks hit. He did lower his head quite a bit, but the Florida guy was a runner, and he also lowered his helmet and created this moving strike zone for Whit Weeks, and you had to react in the blink of an eye to get your head out of the play. So for Brian Kelly, it's like, yeah, it's a routine tackle. It's going to happen. There's going to be helmet to helmet contact. Sometimes it's just going to happen. And, it was just a routine tackle. It wasn't Whit Weeks being reckless or malicious trying to make the tackle. It's just what happened. And especially with the replay component, when you have these angles and you slow it down frame by frame and just turn these split-second moments into these long, drawn-out replay reviews, and you treat it like the Zapruder film, you can find targeting pretty easily if you're looking for it. And then all of a sudden, you take away an opportunity from a guy based on just a routine football play. So yeah, I'm all for, laying down the hammer on guys who come in and they're reckless with it and they're malicious against a defenseless receiver. But when the guy's a runner and he has an opportunity to protect himself and you're just going in for a tackle, it happens on every single play. So give him 15 yards, fine, but harsh. To kick these guys out the game and then add suspensions.
Part of my problem with it is like what is targeting? Like it's way too vague, right? Like we don't really know what it is exactly.
Yeah.
I think based on my general understanding of it, and again, this doesn't really mean that much, but that was probably the Whit Weeks play was probably targeting because he's leading with his helmet.
It was,
and you can't do that.
It was. It was.
And I think that is the thing that we're trying to eliminate. Like just using your leading with your helmet, and So like I'm actually kind of okay with that one. But then there's others. Then there's other situations where it's like seems like it's clearly targeting and they don't call it, or just because the guy didn't hit him in the helmet, but he still led with his head into his like chest or something. So like that. Like remember the Miami Cal game last year, where Cal probably wins the game if there isn't that. If they actually call targeting on one play on one of the drives, so it was like, yeah. I don't know. It's I don't. The part I don't like the most is the fact that we don't know what targeting is.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like I was flipping channels a little bit Saturday night. I wasn't at Tiger Stadium. I was watching South Carolina, Missouri for a minute, and South Carolina had one that to me looked more obvious than Whit Weeks targeting. Like I mean, that is targeting, and they reviewed it. They actually called it targeting on the field. Went and reviewed it as they always do. And then they came back and said, well, it's a 15-yard penalty for unnecessary roughness, but it's not targeting. And so, I agree. We just need a more standard definition of what it is and, what happens when the ball carrier is the one who lowers his head or what happens when the quarterback slides late or all of these things, right? And I think the point is, I like the flagrant foul comparison. It's probably a good one where there's two levels of this. One is, and I guess maybe there is because this South Carolina example I'm talking about where it's a penalty, but you're not ejected. And the other one is, sorry, you've gone too far. This is obviously targeting and you need to sit down.
That's a common sense solution. And I when I think of the word targeting, and this might get a little too granular, but targeting to me connotes intention. Like you are intentionally, purposefully targeting a defenseless receiver, lowering your helmet and being malicious and reckless. That to me is what the word targeting connotes. It doesn't carry, incidental contact that, happens to come from a split second bang bang play when you're just going in for a routine tackle. So I understand why Brian Kelly's frustrated and I understand why Whit Weeks is frustrated. The thing that he said that stuck with me is that Whit Weeks, he only gets so many opportunities to play college football. This season he only got 12 games, and of those games he only get 8 in Tiger Stadium, and of those 8, only a handful are SEC games.
Gonna have to get a home playoff game then.
Yeah, so he missed an opportunity to play in a big game against Florida, and that's something that he can't get back.
All right, so that the short-term effects of this is that DJ Chester has to sit out the first half in Oxford against Ole Miss. That is especially relevant because given the struggles of Weston Davis at right tackle, LSU had made, at least to me, it was a somewhat surprising decision to move Chester out to right tackle. We hadn't seen him play a lot, and he seemed to be playing pretty well, but now they don't have that option, so I guess it's Weston Davis back to right tackle, at least for the first half at Ole Miss. But this right tackle situation is now becoming one to watch too, Cookie.
Yeah, and we saw Chester play some left tackle against Clemson in the opener, if you remember, because Tyree Adams was out of the game for 3 or 4 plays. So I truly don't understand the Chester at tackle situation. I don't think he quite has the quickness or the length to play that position. And I think he's just better equipped to be a guard or a center, even though he has struggled at those spots as well. They keep on trying to find ways to sort of, I won't say insert him, but yeah, I guess it is insert him into the lineup. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think he's a tackle, and they have other tackles on the roster. So that's the part I really don't understand.
If they want to find a way to, the problem here is at right tackle. Weston Davis, he's really struggled through his first 3 starts. According to Pro Football Focus, he allowed 9 hurries and 11 pressures. That's the most on LSU's offensive line by a mile. I think through the first 3 games, no other LSU offensive lineman had given up 4 pressures or 4 hurries. So he's had a rough start to the season. I think LSU wanted to experiment with him quite a bit. At the end of preseason camp, we saw him get bumped from the first team to the second team in favor of Carius Kern. So that experimentation already started before the season began, and now it's carried over into the game. So if they want to, maybe cut back on his snaps, they have the option of sliding out Josh Thompson out to tackle and then maybe putting Chester at right guard, or maybe putting Cohen Eccles at right guard since he's already rotating in with Paul Mabenga at left guard. So they have options if they want to go through it, but just not in the first half against Ole Miss.
Yeah, I think that's what they should do, because Thompson has experience playing at the tackle spot. Not 100% sure if he, again, has the length and quickness to do that at the SEC level, but I at least we've seen it more than we've seen. I think it's more proven than putting Chester out there at right tackle. So I don't know. I that's kind of what I would do, because you're already playing Eccles anyway, so you might as well play him a little bit more. I don't think the left guard to right guard switch is that huge. It's just a lot easier of a transition other than going from left tackle to right tackle, which is a little bit more from a footwork perspective. So I don't know why that if really we haven't seen Thompson at tackle at all. Even during camp, so that's a bit of a question again. But like, I don't know. I feel like that's probably the best option. To me, the second best option is putting Carius Curran out there.
Yeah, I mean, he's a freshman. We'll see. It's tough to tell
he's built
exactly.
like a tackle, at least.
He is, but he's a freshman. He's a highly touted freshman, high-profile recruit. But again, he's kind of an unknown. We haven't seen a whole lot of him. So we'll ask Brian Kelly about it throughout the week. See exactly what he's thinking about it. The bottom line is that Weston Davis has kind of really had his struggles, and LSU might want to make a change there once the SEC play heats up.
Yeah, we'll see. Ole Miss, by the way, among the last ranked teams in the country with only 4 sacks as a team. They're also 122nd in the country in rushing defense. So, if you have to kind of throw a makeshift line out there for a half, Ole Miss might be the team to do it against. But at the same time, knowing what the Rebels' offense is, you're going to have to score points. You can't afford a lot of missteps, or you're going to fall behind in that. As good as LSU's defense has been, Ole Miss is going to score some. LSU's going to have to score to keep up. And so that I guess brings us to the end of this show, and we'll talk more about that on Thursday, guys. It'll be Wilson and Rab on Thursday, most likely. So any quick thoughts from y'all on that Ole Miss LSU matchup before
this is going to be easily the toughest offense LSU's defense has faced, and it's going to be easily the toughest defense that Ole Miss's offense has faced. So, whoever wins that battle basically wins the game. And whoever gets a 30 points wins the game. Yeah. And not saying that anyone will definitely get the 30 points, but it kind of just feels like that sort of matchup.
And we don't know exactly yet who's going to be playing quarterback for Ole Miss, but it seems like either guy is a pretty good option. Austin Simmons, and I'm gonna butcher this guy's name. Trinidad Chambliss. Great name. Poor Tulane. They really did it to Tulane on Saturday, but. It's going to be interesting to see which quarterback is playing, but either way, it seems like Ole Miss is pretty set up well on offense.
Well, we will reveal Koki and Reed's predictions on Thursday's show, as well as Rabs and Wilson's when they're here. And so we're going to say goodbye for today, but we'll be back with that full preview podcast on Thursday. For our producer, Amelia LaCour, he is Koki Riley, he is Reed Darcy, I am Zach Ewing, and this has been the LSU Sports Insider.